Hey everybody. So in this video, I have a very special guest with me. This is I think his third time back on my channel. His name is Dre, otherwise known as Vash Sky. Hi, Dre.
Hello there. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How you doing?
Doing pretty good. I'm doing pretty good. Just taking it day by day. This whole thing is, you know, it's put everybody in a tizzy. So we're just trying to make it out here in good Arizona.
Well, I appreciate you coming back on, and I wanted to bring you on to discuss this whole COVID-19 situation going on with the Walt Disney Company and the parks and everything. And my first question to you is, and I've discussed this in other videos and stuff, but I haven't really talked to you about it yet. Where do you stand right now on the impact of COVID-19 in relation to the Walt Disney Company? What kind of impact financially, specifically, do you think this is going to have on the company?
Well, we know it's having a dire impact. The New York Times just published an article surrounding a certain CEO, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But one of the things I wanted to reference from there was one of the analysts that was looking at this estimated that Disney could be losing as much as $30 million per day from this outbreak and having all of their, parks, resorts, cruise lines, operations shut down. And that's significant because the parks and resorts, it's not really the parks and resorts division anymore, but just when you talk about the parks, the resorts, and the cruise lines, that represented 45% of their business. And so with all of those things sidelined, that's really impacted the Walt Disney Company quite massively, because even if you have a bad film or you have something that happens in another division, you always have the parks usually to kind of shore everything up and it just ensure that the hit isn't too bad. Those numbers can still be profitable from quarter to quarter. And now that is simply no longer the case. On the flip side, you have ESPN, they don't have any sports to show, and that's kind of the flagship of their TV line. And even if there were sports, nobody's advertising right now. So that's hit, not only ESPN but ABC and a bunch of their TV affiliations very, very, very hard. Additionally, there are no movies coming out. Nobody's going to the movie theaters. I believe AMC is very, very close to filing Chapter 11 as we speak. So who knows what that distribution model is going to look like here domestically. Additionally, there are no movies in the pipeline. So rely on that cash flow. This is going to have severe implications for Disney Company going forward. I mean, and they're in dire straits right now.
Yeah, Dre, I completely agree with you. And the thing that really worries me is, I think short term, I think the company can kind of weather this. I think short term, I think it'll be okay, and they'll be hurt, no doubt. But I think short term they can weather this. My big concern, though, is there's a lot of talk of just kind of keeping the economy closed indefinitely, until we get a vaccine. And in my opinion, I don't think Disney or even most companies can afford 12 to 18 months of zero business. I mean, that's going to be I think that would be a death blow to the company.
Companies.
For all companies. Yeah. So like realistically, how long do you think the Walt Disney Company can go having these parks closed before it starts to really impact the company permanently, where they might not recover?
That is a real tough question. I know they just got 2 loans from major banks. I think they just closed up the loan from Citibank to give them $5.25 billion. And that was after they had already gotten a $3 billion loan. So they're on the edge right now. I would say maybe 2 to 3 months.
Wow.
And I think that's being pretty generous. The company simply cannot stay financially solvent without at least some portions of their business opening back up. Again, I mean, the way I heard it was when they closed down Shanghai Disneyland and Hong Kong Disneyland in China. That had already arrested a lot of their cash flow. And so when it came to, that was already going to have an impact in terms of development costs, production, construction projects out in Florida. That was already going to impact them quite negatively. Now with all the parks gone, I mean, it is no it's no surprise that they're furloughing people. You have a company that last summer was, I believe it had 223,000 employees.
Wow.
This is very, very dire. The way I've heard it is that there is a plan being developed, not just within the halls of Disney, but also with the executive position of the company. I'm sorry, not the company, but the government. They're looking to get open back up here relatively soon, because it's just no surprise. This cannot go on for very much longer. What that entails is going to be very, very interesting. Apparently, there's going to be some announcement this week in terms of a council that's being developed, which, by the way, Bob Iger might actually be on. If you remember, Bob Iger was actually on the Economic Advisory Council for the president in the very first days of the administration. That went all the way up to 2017 until he pulled that after the Paris Accord, and that's a whole another thing. But I believe they might ask Bob Iger again to step in and have a position on that council and get a plan going, or a set of guidelines post-COVID, what that looks like for the short term and the long term of the economy and the Walt Disney Company going forward.
Now let's fast forward to the day that they finally open the parks, right? Okay, so the COVID thing is starting to wane, and Disney decides, okay, we're going to open the parks. So when the parks open, in your opinion, what do the parks look like on that reopening day? What kind of policies and various tactics are Disney going to use to protect the public, but also allow people to come into their parks? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's very interesting. This is something I've given great thought to, and you have some people, maybe Fresh Baked has kind of offered his opinion. You've had some other people in the Disney content creators in the YouTube space offer their opinions. You heard Bob Iger. He says maybe temperature screenings are in the future. I know Shanghai has already kind of had a semi pseudo opening procedure right now that they're employing, where portions of the Shanghai Disney Resort are getting back online. And one of those is temperature screenings at the front gate, similar to bag check. I think you have a short term and a long term. Long term, you get a vaccine, and we don't have to worry about this, hopefully. In the short term, I think there's going to be a number of changes implemented. I think it's not out of the question that you see capacity restrictions. I think it's not out of the question that you maybe see a mask mandate for each individual. Again, this is private property, owned by the Disney company. They can kind of employ any rules necessary to keep their business afloat and under the terms of or the guise of safety. You got to keep everybody safe. I don't think having or mandating a face mask is completely out of the question to keep everybody safe within the park. I think you see more of those portable hand washing stations that were being delivered to Walt Disney World before March 12th, before the shutdowns were announced. I think you see more hand sanitizing stations around, and I think the biggest question, because restaurants, some people have theorized, okay, maybe you have the capacity in those locations. Maybe keep every single table and chair configuration 6 feet apart, that kind of thing. The big question is going to be attractions.
Yeah.
What do you do when it comes to the attractions of the Disney parks? And again, you can argue that, a restaurant opening up invites its own level of intrigue, but people go there for the attractions. Let's just be honest here.
Yeah.
So what does that look like? Do you use a virtual queue system? Again, the virtual queue system really was only really developed for maybe 1 or 2 attractions at the most. You really can't. I don't think there's a world where every single attraction employs this at the same time. There's just simply not enough space, especially in Disneyland. But I would also make the argument for Walt Disney World. I think maybe you've seen these X patterns show up at grocery stores and pharmacies, where they kind of label where people stand. Ensuring that 6 feet apart is maintained. I think maybe you see that for queues. And I think for maybe attraction ride vehicles, maybe in the very, very short term, maybe it is something where you have somebody on either end of the exits for attraction ride vehicles. Maybe they wipe some services off. I think I wouldn't put it past them to actually put hand sanitizing stations directly after you get off of ride vehicles. I think all of these things, I don't think that's out of bounds. I think that's pretty square.
Yeah, no, I completely agree, Dre. And in terms of the temperature checks, there's been a lot of talk in the community about that, because Bob Iger mentioned that specifically.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, and rightfully so, are saying, well, that doesn't mean that it's going to prevent the spread, because you can take a Tylenol, you can bring the fever down, or you can be asymptomatic. A lot of people are asymptomatic. But I would argue, okay, well, first of all, I agree with them. I mean, that is a factor for sure. That is a factor. But I would argue that the temperature checks are, I think, the most realistic, efficient way Disney can kind of screen people before entering the park. They can't realistically request, to show recent lab work or to, perform a full physical on you before you enter the park. I mean, there has to be some way they can check you without it taking an excruciating amount of time and resources to get you to the gate. And the temperature checks are, like you mentioned, basically the equivalent of the bag check, looking in your bag. It's the equivalent of that, just the medical version of that. So I think that's like 90% coming. I think that Bob Iger mentioned that by no accident. I think that that's going to be happening. And I also agree with you. I think that the capacity limits are going to be set. I think they're going to reopen the parks, and I think that'll be like, let's say I'm just kind of throwing an arbitrary number out there, but let's just say, that the capacity is 30,000 a day, right? I think they might say, okay, for the first 6 months, the capacity is only going to be 15,000 a day. And, I think that's very possible. And the thing that you mentioned too, with when you go to the grocery store and they got the little marks on the ground where you have to social distance, that's a great point. That's a really good, I actually, you know what? I think they might do that with the attractions, because like you mentioned, the boarding pass thing, you can do that maybe for a few, maybe for like the big e-tickets, maybe implement some sort of boarding thing, but you really can't realistically do that for everything. And for the ones that you can't do a boarding pass situation, they might just do that, where they have cast members kind of scatter throughout the queue, making sure everyone is maintaining that social distancing. So it's going to be, there's one thing for sure, the parks are changed forever. It's going to, this is a 9/11 level event,
I think the parks, they're definitely changed in the short term. And what I mean by short term, in the very, very, very short term, you're talking maybe 3 months. In the short term, to expand that out a little bit, maybe you're talking 12 months before a vaccine. I don't know if they're changed forever. And I guess, you mentioned capacity. I think capacity is going to be determined by what's the minimum amount of people that you require to be in the park to be profitable. I think that's going to be a determination made. I think maybe, in conjunction with Burbank and TDA and TDO, Team Disney Anaheim and Team Disney Orlando, I think they're jointly going to be making kind of those capacity decisions. I think you might have something there where they maybe adjust it per day. I can see discounts in the short-term future to kind of get people back in there. When it comes to your, when you brought up maybe testing, thermometer checking, yeah, you could have asymptomatic people, but it's simply a way to screen as many, like you said, as many people as possible to reduce the chance of somebody who may have this from being in the park as much as possible. And that's why the procedures on the back end of that, reducing maybe restaurant capacity, having the outlines of where you stand in queues and so forth. That's, again, it's not, when you thermometer check at the gate, obviously, like you said, that's not a for sure kind of thing there. So that's why you have those additional procedures on the back end and when you're actually inside the park. So it's all about, mitigation. It's all about attempting to, if there is maybe an outbreak, maybe having it, again, it's all, this is crazy. this is quite insane. I think you're right. I think you're going to have cast members enforcing, people to stay apart as much as possible. But, the parks, they just weren't built long-term for this.
Yeah.
And I think short-term, I could see it, but long-term, I just can't see it.
Yeah, no. And I when I say long-term, I don't mean necessarily I agree I don't think that the social distancing and the mask wearing and stuff is going to be permanent, but I think that certain things like at the checkpoints, like for example, when you enter the park,
Mm-hmm.
how the bag checks have sort of stuck around after 9/11 for a very long time. I could see the temperature checks maybe sticking around for a very long time past that. But I completely agree with you in terms of the other elements of this where the reduced capacity, the social distancing. Yeah, that's not a permanent thing. They can't, as a business, they can't maintain that forever. They have to allow their parks to be busy. I mean, otherwise you would never have a fireworks show. How would you even have a fireworks show without people, with people, everyone being 6 feet apart? You couldn't even logistically do it. They have to eventually get back to that normal.
I think so. I think in the very short term, I think Fresh Baked has brought this up a few times, where maybe in the very, very short term, things like parades and fireworks shows aren't online at the onset. But again, like you said, we're going to have to get back to normal here. People say this is the new normal. It's not. This thing is going away eventually, or at least maybe in lieu of a vaccine, maybe the perception around it changes in terms of maybe a treatment or a therapy that we don't know of as of right now. But as that perception maybe changes, or as a vaccine is established, I don't think I will disagree with you somewhat. I don't think temperature checks are going to be a forever thing. I just don't see it. Is it invasive? Is there HIPAA ramifications? I don't know.
That's true.
But when it comes to maybe like fireworks, maybe initially those things don't happen, but as time goes on, maybe they try and I don't know. Maybe they try to corral people and try to prevent them from bunching up as they did on Main Street, and maybe having a fireworks show that's more dispersed throughout the parks to try to keep people as socially distanced as possible. I mean, this is going to be a fascinating thing. Nobody's, even Team Disney Anaheim or Team Disney Orlando, they've never opened a park back up from shutdown. Think about the vendors. Are the vendors going to be there to fully supply the foods that are served at these parks?
It's a great point.
They're going to have to ramp up in hiring some of these people back, and not everybody's going to maybe make it. We're in uncharted waters. Anything I think I tweeted out when this initially happened. Anything's possible.
Well, and to kind of stay on this whole thing, I there was a lot of talk when Bob Iger stepped down. There was a lot of talk of him. I saw a lot of it in the community. He stepped down so he can avoid this COVID-19 situation. He wants to leave on top and let Chapek just deal with it. Now, I've always attended to the idea that, I don't believe that. I think Iger is a much more careful, much more cautious leader than that. I don't believe that he would spend all this time trying to craft a succession plan for years just to kind of like burn the house down on his way out. I don't think that's the kind of leader that Bob Iger is. Now, I could be wrong. I don't know him personally, but I just, based on his 15 plus years or whatever with the company, that doesn't seem like his style.
Yeah.
Now he's come back. Well, he's come back to some degree. He's starting to retake some of his
CEO duties, you could say.
Yeah, exactly. Some of his CEO authority and kind of assisting Chapek. What are your thoughts on that whole thing? I mean, this is kind of juicy. Like, I'm really curious.
I know. Oh, it's so crazy. Literally days. I think you'd ask me, hey, let's do a talk, and then like the day after, boom, this whole thing gets exposed out in the wild there, and it's just like, whoa, I didn't see this. I think I would agree with you. I don't think it's in Bob Iger's character to just say, ship is sinking, here you go. I don't think that's Bob Iger. Let's be honest. He is very image conscious. He is very concerned about his legacy. I don't think that would look good on him. And I heard those rumors too, that he just kind of threw the reins out and said, oh, it's all yours, even though it was heading for a cliff, so to speak. I think he was looking at the share price, looking at how successful that Disney had just been. Again, they had just had another record-breaking year at the box office. They're going to be, this is back in November. They're going to be opening up their newest product when it came to the Imagineers and Rise of Resistance. That was going to be just gangbusters. All of these things were just kind of lining up, and it's like, okay, let's go ahead and have this transition finally take place. That whole thing changes, and the New York Times article that was published paints kind of a picture that maybe he was thinking of, the succession so much that it kind of sidelined him to what was actually going on in Asia, and that would carry over to the rest of the world. I think you're right. Even if Bob Iger even has stock options, how much are those going to be worth when the company goes under?
Exactly.
There is a fiscal incentive to do it, but I think Bob Iger is like, look, I've got to do something. I can't just let this company just die off as soon as I throw the reins to Chapek. I was even saying early at the time, I'm like, wow, if you wanted Chapek to fail, this was an expert way in doing that. Yeah. But I think even before then, it was like, okay, this is serious. I believe when, California started shutting everything down after the president has his travel ban from Europe, I think it really got serious for everybody. This is a big deal. And I think ever since then, we heard too that who was it? Gavin Newsom had conversations not with Bob Chapek but with Bob Iger about the closure of Disneyland. That was kind of a hint there that maybe this transitional period hadn't taken off as it had been scripted from the shareholders meeting. Something was going on if Gavin Newsom was talking with Bob Iger, not Bob Chapek, about what to do with Disneyland when these whole shutdowns started back in March 12th. So that was our key. Like, okay, maybe he is actually coming back here, and instead of maybe going riding off into the sunset, maybe he is taking control. So I think it's very, very interesting. This is I don't think this is what he envisioned, that's for sure.
Well, yeah, and I've always been a proponent of giving these guys a chance. Like I've made a few videos about Chapek, and a lot of people in the fan community don't like Chapek. But I've always said, hey, give the guy a chance. You never know how these guys are going to rule, or what kind of leader they're going to be until they're the guy in charge, you know? But I have to say, since Chapek became CEO, I think he's kind of dropped the ball on this whole COVID thing, because a lot of people see the COVID-19 situation as as kind of like a uh, like a death nail to Chapek, right? Like, oh man, this really sucks. He got this right when he started as CEO, but in a way, it was actually kind of a silver lining, kind of a blessing for Chapek, because this was really an opportunity for him to step up and show what kind of leader he is. You know, this was a situation where he really could have stepped up, and I'm not seeing that. You know, I mean, if I was in Chapek's shoes, and it's always easier to say it like when you're on the outside, but I mean, if I was Chapek, I would have taken a more aggressive approach. I would have been doing those interviews, you know, talking to the various, you know, trades and saying, hey, look, I'm the leader of this company now, right? And I'm gonna this is my vision, this is my plan. And really get aggressive and be in front of the camera and really imprint the idea to the fans and to Wall Street and to, you know, the industry that, hey, I'm in charge now, and be confident in that. Instead, he's sort of hiding out. He's missing in action. He doesn't do any interviews. He lets Bob Iger do all the interviews. And now Bob Iger comes in, and Bob Iger is going to take on more CEO responsibilities, and it just looks like daddy's here to fix it for him. You know, if Chapek would have taken more of a leadership kind of approach and been more you know, out there in front of the camera doing the interviews, I think this would look better optics wise, you know. And even bringing Iger in, you know, Chapek could have done the whole thing where he would, you know, said like, hey, look, my old boss, Bob Iger, he's got 15 plus years experience doing this. I'm going to kind of enlist him to be like my co-CEO while we kind of navigate through these uncharted waters, but make it Chapek's decision. Make it look like he's running the show. Right now, it completely looks like Iger is totally running the show, and Chapek is taking a total back seat, you know?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I guess to add a little bit more nuance, I liken it to two pilots up in the air with the you know, the 747, and you know, the head pilot. He's been doing it for a long time, and now it's time for the co-pilot, who has never really been able to be in that, you know, that kind of I don't know what you would call it. I don't know aviation terminology. I do apologize, but the co-pilot, you know, being the guy who's never really had full control of the stick, so to speak.
Yeah.
And as soon as it's like, oh yeah, no, let's give you a chance here. You know, engine number 1, engine number 4 go out. I'm willing to give the co-pilot in this case, Bob Chapek, a little bit of slack here, because I mean, nobody's ever seen this before.
Yeah.
You know, not since Walt's day, World War II. Nobody's ever seen anything like this affect the company in such a profound way. I will agree with you that it should have been Bob Chapek's time to shine, but I think, to give Bob a little credit, I think he was looking to coast maybe a little bit to kind of get his feet wet before actually making substantial changes. I don't think anybody anticipated that he would have to make just worlds of changes so, you know, so broad, so sweeping, so fast. So, I mean, maybe it was stunted. Maybe he was like, I literally do not know what to do here. I was just handing the reins, and I think it took everybody off guard. It's unfortunate that he didn't get that chance for a smooth transition.
Yeah.
That he wasn't able to, like, you know, really get in there and kind of make his mark before something like this happened. It all happened. We're talking weeks. This all transpires. So it's, I will agree. It's a lost opportunity for sure, but I think really Bob, and there's just too much at play here. There's too much at stake. I think it's too much for Bob just to sit idly by and just kind of hope that Bob Chapek has the instincts gained over like 2 weeks to make to make the right decisions. So
Yeah,
I'm willing to give him some slack. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's fair. That's fair. Now, like in terms of Chapek going forward, his prospects as CEO, how do you think this whole situation is going to play out in that regard? Like, because I know you referenced the New York Times article and how, and how Bob was going to, come in and kind of take a little bit of the control back. I think in that same article, it did mention that Iger mentioned to Chapek that the board will keep in mind the crazy circumstances going on right now when they evaluate you. Yes. How do you think that's going to play out for Chapek, though? I mean, do you see him surviving this position, considering everything going on? Do you think that the board will be forgiving enough to kind of let things kind of slide and he'll be a CEO like Iger was for 15, 20 years, whatever? Or do you think his tenure will be kind of short-lived because he just came in at the wrong time?
I think due to the timing and the circumstances, I think it's definitely been compromised. I really don't know if the board is going to look at this and go, well, okay, this unprecedented thing happened and you didn't step up, you're out of here. But I actually don't think it's too outside. I don't. Anything's possible right now. Like I said, I don't think it's too out there to say that maybe the board might reconsider Bob Chapek's position when it comes to this whole thing. I know Bob Iger's been grooming Bob Chapek to be in this role, and I know that the board unanimously voted Chapek be the guy. I'm not sure if it's one of these things where it's like, hey, let's circle the wagons on this one more time here, and is Bob Chapek really the guy to get us on the next 15, 20-year run?
Well, yeah. And it's funny, as fans, we kind of look from the outside in. So, we kind of see Chapek probably a lot differently than the board and Bob Iger sees him. They work with him on a very intimate basis. They know him very, very well. And there might be a lot of, I know there's a lot of things that, like, as fans, we don't know. We don't know the internal everyday stuff going on. So, yeah, there might be a lot more going on behind the scenes that we're not aware of. And maybe Chapek has really sold the board on, his management style. And that's just something that we would not really know. We wouldn't be privy to that because we're not in the room, So,
yeah, I want to get a little bit more information from some of my insiders within the company. What was the thing that sold the board on Chapek specifically? Because we've seen a lot of what I would call great executives walk in and out of Disney. Why is Bob Chapek that guy? I'd like to know that answer as well. Is it just his, is it just his experience? Is it his management style? Is it the some of the big profound things that he's done? I'd like to very much know that information as well. I think you saw that New York Times article. There was kind of a little thing where Bob Iger mentioned that any big plans would be up to his successor. Kind of putting it in Bob Chapek's camp there. I think that's a very interesting statement. I think from Bob Iger's perspective, this is not going to hurt Bob Chapek in the term, when it comes to the image he's crafted in front of the shareholders. I don't think the shareholders. I really, really do think the shareholders might rethink this a little bit, given this time and how this all plays out.
Yeah. It'll be very interesting. I was wrong. I really thought for probably about the past year, I was convinced. I'm like, there's no way they're gonna pick Chapek to do the to be the next CEO, because I'm like, they historically they usually pick studio guys to do that, and I thought for surely Kevin Mayer, with being with Iger, being kind of his right hand man through all the acquisitions, and he was the guy who kind of spearheaded the Disney Plus thing, which turned out to be incredibly successful. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, it's got to be Kevin Mayer. It's got to be. It's not going to be Chapek. And then when the announcement came, I was like, it's Chapek. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. That was very, very interesting. And it just kind of goes to show that from a fan perspective, how much we don't know. You know, there's a lot of stuff going on internally that we're just not privy to, and it's pretty crazy.
You know, it's very interesting. The Disney parks and resorts, again, it's not that division anymore, but you know, let's just be fair. It's the parks, the resorts, and the cruise lines. And, you know, I know they've been merged with consumer products, but the parks and resorts, again, that segment of their business makes up 45%. It's very telling that the people that have been looked at as the next CEOs have all been kind of placed into parks and resorts for a short period. Remember, Tom Staggs was the guy for a little while there.
Yeah.
That was looked at as, hey, maybe he's the next CEO. We should have all kind of clued into that and been like, okay, well, is Bob Chapek the guy now that he's the head of parks and resorts, now consumer products and experiences and whatever? I think it's very interesting because that division within their company plays such a huge part of their business. I would see why you would want any prospective CEO to be in that position and get a feel for that business because it is such a profit generator for them. So that I think that's the only knock on Kevin Mayer was he just wasn't put into that role. And I know they plan on Disney Plus being a far bigger portion of their business going forward, but for right now, maybe Bob Chapek being that guy, you know, that's kind of what the thinking or philosophy was surrounding that decision.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Kevin Mayer really hasn't been in the public eye that much. And I think for a Disney CEO, that is somewhat important. You know, it just kind of, yeah, I mean, people are just kind of used to their Disney CEOs being very public. Kevin Mayer seems like a very behind the scenes kind of guy. Chapek, love him or hate him. I mean, he has been out there and people are fairly familiar with him.
A little bit more, but there are some analysts who kind of like, who is Bob Chapek? I mean, we know about him
right
from our perspective because that's what we do. That's the business we're in. But there are some analysts who didn't actually know who he was before this whole transitional period. So that part of it is fascinating.
It is. Now, I wanted to kind of pivot a little bit from the theme parks into the movies because this whole situation with the lockdowns and the COVID-19 is really affecting the movies too, which is a huge part of Disney. Mm-hmm. And you know, there's been talk, like I think you mentioned it earlier, where AMC is prepping for bankruptcy. You know, a lot of Wall Street analysts are predicting that this company might not return. That would be a major blow to the movie industry.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Disney and kind of generally the movie theater going experience? Like, are after this whole situation, is this going to be an industry that that changes drastically, or what are your feelings on this whole thing?
Oh boy, you know, I movie going is going to be, man, if you thought the problems with the parks were hard, at least the parks are outside and at least there's some space. You're literally trapped in a room with hundreds of other people. I mean, how is that going to work at all? And you know, you can't enforce the mask policy there too much so, because how are you going to sell concessions? It's how these theaters, that's how they make money at all. This is going to be a little different. There's a whole other set of problems when it comes to this. You know, do you have spaces between each seat, back and forth, that kind of thing? How do you group families in? I'd be very, very concerned for the theater industry as well. And again, when you lose theaters, that's lost distribution, could be lost revenue and that kind of thing. I mean, it's a big deal. I don't really know what the solutions you can employ for theaters specifically. I mean, I just haven't thought critically about it enough, but it's going to be profoundly different as well. And I don't know what that looks like. I know Disney just posted their film slate, their revised film slate. Now that this has all happened, did you see that Jungle Cruise got moved to 2021, and
Yeah.
Eternals as well, and Raya, The Last Dragon, and that kind of thing. That was all moved. So I think they're anticipating that it's going to be open eventually.
Right.
I believe the first film is now Mulan, July 24th, I think it is. So they're anticipating that this is going to open. What does that look like? Man, I have no idea. This is, like I said, this never happened before, and it's just the perception around this COVID-19. It's this highly transmissible thing, and maybe I will say maybe one of the things that's helping the theater industry is that they're very much kind of young adult focused.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Like people under maybe 35 are the people that they kind of are marketing to when it comes to these films, or at least the larger majority of films. So maybe that helps them a little bit, but man, I don't know. I don't know what happens with the theater going experience. It was already kind of on the edge with the streaming platforms and everything, but now this is definitely going to upend their businesses for sure.
Yeah, you're right. You hit the nail on the head when you said it was kind of already a wounded animal going into this, and now it's like, what now? I think that if I were to make a prediction in regards to the movie going experience, I think that it's going to ultimately survive, because I think there is still a market for going to the theater and having that whole experience. But I think it's going to emerge and continue to be a smaller market overall. I think it's going to slowly kind of become, more of like how Broadway is, where you buy where it's like an event. You go to a play, you go to the opera, you go to Broadway. It's more of like an event, a night out, right? But it's not on every corner. There's not a playhouse on every corner to watch a Broadway show. Yeah. It's more of an experience, right? I think that movie theaters are going to kind of go in that direction. I think it's kind of be like the Broadway El Capitan model, where it's kind of a treat, but it's not like on every corner in every community anymore.
Right.
And it's going to play a much smaller it's going to be a much smaller piece of that box office pie, because now studios can get money from their streaming service, from video on demand. Mm-hmm. It's more direct to consumer. The theater experience is kind of becoming less and less relevant. And I think this is going to really, really expedite that,
I think it is. I think we were already in a transitional period with the movie industry already, and I think this is very much sped that up. I can see your kind of idea, maybe multiplexes that maybe have less auditoriums but are bigger and are more experience driven. I think that could be something that is viable going forward. I know Bob Iger had this idea. This was like 10 years ago. He had this idea that every single distribution platform, when it comes to a film being produced, is released on the same day. It's the same day in the theaters, same day on Blu-ray, same day on streaming. Like it's just blitzkriegs all at once. Wow. Obviously, the theater owners didn't like that idea, as you can probably tell. But the compromise was suggested that maybe there's like a kind of a red box situation, that after you get your ticket and see the film, you gain additional access to a red box platform that allows you to buy the ticket. Buy the film on Blu-ray in a kiosk past the point of entry with your ticket, and that's how you gain access to the films on streaming and those kinds of things to kind of keep the theaters into that business. It's very interesting because the theater industry is slow to adapt and change, and that has really been, it's not really been in their best interests. One of my family members suggested that maybe instead of looking at a all or nothing price, where the same film, no matter what its budget was, is the same price as the film next to it. So, for example, something like something from like Spotlight, or maybe like what is it?
Like
Like a
Miramax,
yeah,
something like
or
that.
yeah, something like a smaller film, maybe with like a $40 million budget. Why is it priced the same as a film with a $200 million budget? You
Right.
know, dynamic pricing. Go ahead.
No, no, you're absolutely right. It's like yeah, you're paying the same price whether you're watching the Avengers or Star Wars as you would with a small film that an indie company made that it has like a $10 million budget.
Yeah.
That's actually a good point.
It never. Once that was brought to light, I was like, "Wow, that really doesn't make any sense. Why haven't they done that?"
Yeah.
Maybe you see adjustments like that going forward, like you said. Maybe it's more experience driven. You have less auditoriums, but maybe you have dynamic pricing for films. That could be the case. Again, now it's time for theater owners to really like say, "Hey, we have to change our business model because this is simply not sustainable."
Yeah, and I wonder too. I know the president has really talked about bailing out certain industries and what have you. I don't remember him ever saying anything about the theater industry, but it's possible. I mean, the theater industry is a huge industry, and it feeds a lot of other industries. You think of all the concessions and the candy companies and all that actually benefits from the movie theater experience. So I wonder what that's gonna look like. I wonder if like the government will bail like AMC out if they're gonna sink or something like that, and to kind of save them, because a lot of people I don't know if you watch John Campea, but I like John. I watch his stuff all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking about like, what if the movie studios came in and sort of bailed out AMC? But I think there's some legal issues with that, right? Wasn't there like a law passed in like I don't remember, it was like 70 years ago or something like that, with Paramount and studios owning
some kind of rule barring verticality, like you can't, like, I think that was one of the things, right? That was one of the reasons why the kind of the Hollywood moguls that we know of today moved from Chicago and back east, because back then it was you could only show a film in which that same production company owned or whatever. And it's like you had things where certain theaters couldn't show certain films because of that, and the whole Hollywood industry. That's why they moved out west, to get away from that kind of whole thing that happened. I think this is like 1910s, 1920s. The reason why they moved was to get away from that kind of theater establishment. So when it came to Hollywood, it was like, okay, well, we're going to have theaters that show everybody's movies, and it's this kind of beneficial thing. I think you might be right, though. I think there might be legal implications with that.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how that's going to pan out. Whether the government bails AMC out, being the biggest movie theater chain, whether the studios, if they can legally, if they kind of rally together, because it's in their best interest too that AMC stays afloat. But it's interesting.
I know part of this relief package that was just passed by Congress and signed into law by the president has some kind of provision for bigger companies, and I believe AMC qualifies for that specifically. Neither the president or the secretary of the Treasury has gone into how that whole thing is going to be working. I wouldn't put it past the government maybe looking at potentially relieving or as you say, bail out AMC in the short term, because it's such an important distribution platform for films.
Yeah, for films, and it feeds other industry, and it needs to stay afloat. I think it's important for the country's economy, and but yeah, it's a crazy time, man. It's really unprecedented, like you said. This is something that we've all never really been through. I wanted to kind of leave you though with one thing, kind of on a positive note, kind of a fun thing I wanted to ask you. Since we're all quarantined, right? And we all have nothing to do. We're all at home. What are some of the things that you're watching on streaming platforms that you might want to suggest to people out there, whether it be Disney Plus, Netflix, Hulu, whatever it is? What are you watching? Maybe suggest to people out there that might be something fun to check out while they're stuck at home.
Let's be honest, I watch a lot of YouTube. I don't really watch streaming now that much. I do apologize. I know you're maybe looking for an answer. I really don't watch streaming all that much. I have Disney Plus, but I know Clone Wars was just put out. I really want to watch the Clone Wars. I believe season 7 it is, and get into that again. Tiger King, as anybody can talk about. That whole thing is blown up, and I've
Yeah.
watched a couple episodes of that. It's like, this is very interesting. But yeah, just a lot of YouTube. Unfortunately, it's one of those things where, because this is such a big deal, I've kind of been forced to kind of take more of to kind of watching not mainstream media, but just kind of the news and what's going on there, and
Cool.
what's all going on right now. So unfortunately, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I haven't been watching that much streaming. But I didn't want to have one full note here.
Sure.
Bob Iger has always envisioned, or he actually said this years ago, that the company had become so big and broad that it had lost a lot of its ability to become, adapt or be nimble in the marketplace. And so, that New York Times article kind of hit it a little bit, stating that maybe as this company contracts, as it has to survive, maybe some of the change might be permanent, and maybe the company might change to be a little bit more nimble, to be a little bit more able to adapt with the changes of the marketplace, because they are changing so fast. So maybe in a way, this will position the company to really roar back and be that company that can adjust accordingly with the marketplace going forward, and put it on a longer term road of success in a way that maybe we didn't think was possible before this whole thing. So I will say that, at least, I don't know, might be some silver lining of somewhat.
That's interesting that you mentioned that. That's very interesting. Now, what do you think that means necessarily? Like, in terms of being a leaner company, smaller company, does that mean selling off some of the brands that they've recently purchased? Does that mean selling off some of the? Because I know Disney owns a lot of things that people don't even realize they own. I mean, they own a lot
Absolutely,
of, yeah, they own a lot of video platforms and stuff, and various companies that even as super fans, as me and you, we don't even really realize what they own. Well, what does that mean when you say like a smaller company, in your opinion? Like, what kind of things would they kind of offload to make themselves a little leaner?
Well, we've seen kind of a reorganization of management structure. So there's, I don't know, in government we would call that bureaucracy, and in a company, we'd call that, maybe too many chefs in the kitchen, so to speak. So maybe you streamline a little bit that way. I don't think you offload IPs necessarily. I know, they've now, I believe EA has exclusive rights for gaming. I think maybe some more licensing, maybe in the company's future, when it comes to, certain portions of the business that aren't in the direct purview of the studio. I think maybe, yeah, like I said, less chefs in the kitchen. Maybe a little bit less personnel, in order to further or streamline and make more efficient decision making. I think is one of the things maybe you get to. We've seen some streamlining in some other areas. Imagineering is very different from the entity it used to be back in the 50s and 60s. They're more of kind of almost contractors now. Maybe you see that in other areas. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I think, like I said, maybe because you have less decision makers, it can adapt more easily to changes. I don't know if you necessarily get rid of IP, because IP is the golden goose that keeps on laying eggs for you, as long as you treat it right and treat it properly. Like the Muppets, for example. Why don't we see much of the Muppets? Well, there's just not enough people to really give it the attention it deserves. Maybe with streamlining some areas of the company, maybe you can give attention to others in a way that you couldn't before. I know that's kind of an abstract thinking, but
Right.
I think that makes sense
Yeah.
somewhat.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's gonna be very interesting because I remember reading that too, like on that article, Iger was talking about how, it's gonna be a more efficient, leaner company. And I was sitting back wondering, like, what does that mean? What are they gonna do? But I think you hit the nail on the head when you said less chefs in the kitchen, less
Yeah.
personnel, less office space, and just kind of making it more lean on that end. Because like you said, like you really can't offload a lot of IP. Like, I mean, you're not going to give away like Marvel or Star Wars. There's too much money in that. I mean, maybe things like the Muppets, but I doubt it. I don't think that's really good. Even if they were to offload it, they probably wouldn't even make that much anyway at this point.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, I think that the personnel is where it's at. I think that and the rent space for all these big, huge buildings. If you lower the personnel, you can lower, the amount of buildings you have and all that, and it kind of saves the company a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, Bob Iger was born out of an industry of change when he was a weatherman and stuff like that, first getting into the business with ABC. The transition was already coming online in the form of cable television. And he always had in his mind, hey, look, you got to be ahead of change before it hits and you're not noticing it. And so I think as far as the company goes and as far as being able to adapt to change, I think that's very much I think that's Bob Iger's that's been his plan all along. So I think that's for the best for the company. I think it is very broad. It is very like big, and sometimes they kind of fail to see stuff because there are so many there are so many voices. For example, like with this whole Baby Yoda thing from The Mandalorian. I mean, how did you not produce anything for that?
Unbelievable.
Maybe they were just out thinking themselves. Maybe it was like, hey, we don't want these spoilers to get out. Let's not produce any kind of merchandise for this thing for this particular character at all. But it's like, yeah, but everybody's gonna fall in love with this thing. Like, yeah. I cannot believe to this day that they missed that whole thing.
That's unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. And they've done that a few times now. Even I remember back in 2013, prior to like Frozen's release, they really weren't marketing that film a lot. They didn't seem to have a whole lot of faith in that movie. And it comes out and it like changes society. I mean, it's like an incredible hit. It's like, it is so weird to me how the things that are so massive, they kind of sleep on them.
It is kind of weird, but is that because everybody's out doing something else? Is it because there are so many people that are just kind of overlooking these things? I don't know. With Frozen, that's interesting because I think it was because it was in its development hell for so long. I think it had been kind of going through the paces within the company for like 40 years back in there's stuff where Mark Davis had concepts for the Snow Queen fairy tale and so forth, and I think that might have been why they slept on it, but I don't think anybody assumed it was going to be a phenomenon in the way it was. But it's kind of interesting, like, why didn't you produce enough merchandise to meet that initial demand?
Right.
It's just kind of weird.
It's really weird, yeah, and especially with that Baby Yoda thing. I mean, this character, how does any executive look at that character and be like, oh yeah, we're just not going to make any toys for that? I mean, come on, it's absolutely incredible, but I don't know. It blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind.
It is that was the weirdest thing. It's like out of any company, out of all the companies, all the media companies, Disney is the one that sleeps on Baby Yoda. Disney? Really? I mean, they're trying to market everything. They come out with, new ears and stuff and backpacks at the parks every, season or whatever. If they slept on Baby Yoda, I just couldn't believe it. That was nuts.
Yeah, they were pushing things like, like the Sith troopers and stuff, which, were cool looking, I guess. It was kind of relatively boring though, in terms of like, it's a red stormtrooper, but they pushed the hell out of that.
Yeah.
But the Baby Yoda, which is like something really new and cute and adorable and like, different. Nope, we're not going to make any toys.
What? Like that whole thing. That whole thing was just crazy because it became this. I mean, it wasn't even just popular in the normal popular sense.
No.
It was a phenomenon. It took over everything, and you didn't have not one bit of merchandise. I mean, that is crazy. That is insane. At least Frozen. At least it had a merchandise line.
Right.
Baby Yoda, there was nothing. You went to the parks. Hey, can we get Baby Yoda? Oh yeah, here's some like magnets for $20. It's like, what?
Yeah.
You don't have anything, not even shirts, not even, and that stuff eventually came, but you got to strike while that iron's even before the iron's hot. And usually Disney is the company that does that, and that whole thing blew me away. I do apologize. I'm sorry.
No, you're absolutely right. And like you said, you touched upon, oh well, they didn't want spoilers. Okay, that's fine, but at least have the merchandise in waiting for the release and then drop, because Baby Yoda, it wasn't like he was like introduced in the season finale. It was like, I think it was the first episode that we saw him. So when they dropped the Mandalorian, they could have easily have started to release the merchandise. They could have had the merchandise ready, and then when the Mandalorian dropped in November, start pumping out the Baby Yoda merch. But nothing. They had nothing ready, and now they're having to play catch up with it.
It doesn't make any sense. I mean, it really didn't make any sense at all. And now, that's the other thing too. That's the one thing we didn't get into. I know the Disney company, when it comes to consumer products, they get a lot of their stuff overseas in a particular country that is now in the news a lot now. How does that change the whole thing? Do their production facilities, when it comes to that kind of merchandise, do they move out? That's going to be a whole thing too. But yeah, because they produce baby merchandise, Baby Yoda merchandise overseas. Now it's like, okay, well, we want to go ahead and adapt to this change. Well, we can't, because we can't even get anything back into the States for like 6 months. It's like, whoa, that ain't even reality. But that's kind of what I'm talking about when it comes to adaptation and kind of being responsive or being ahead of the marketplace before those changes take place.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. There's always a silver lining. Maybe this is gonna end up being something that makes the company even better, and maybe it's kind of a wake-up call, so to speak, for them, because they have dropped the ball over the years, and this will be kind of a wake-up call, and we'll emerge even better after all this. I hope so.
Yeah, I think you're going to see the real cream rising to the top, and then that's the other thing too we didn't get into. How is this going to change development? What projects are they going to approve going forward, and what construction projects in the parks specifically are they going to move forward with? Because there were some things that were, hey, poster in the ground, we got stuff coming. These things are pretty much set. But there are other things that were, maybe the phase 2 of Avengers Campus. Is that going to happen? I know that was kind of, suspected. Well, is this really going to go forward? This seems like an ambitious project. Maybe too ambitious for the time. I don't know. Things are definitely changing, and they're changing fast.
They're changing fast.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you, Dre. You're a good friend of mine, and I appreciate you coming on. And thank you so much for, I had a great time talking to you. I want to have you on again. Like you said, there's a lot of topics that we didn't even get to touch upon today. So
There's too much.
There's just so much that this whole thing encompasses. So maybe soon we'll do another video and kind of touch into like what you said, like the Avengers Campus and things, because there's a lot to chew into with that, and like future projects in Florida with the 50th coming out.
The 50th. Oh my goodness. You think about that. I think they were going to start the festivities in October. Does that change? There's too much. There's way too much to get into right now.
So maybe next video we'll do just a future projects video and just discuss that stuff, because that's a whole nother topic that we can probably go on for at least another hour on that.
Absolutely. I'm super excited. That'd be really, really cool.
Well, thank you so much, Dre. I do appreciate you coming on. Tell everybody at home where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter at Vash Sky, like you said. That's V as in Victor, ASH as in Hilo, SKY as in Yankee. So you can find me there. And that's pretty much where I hang out. I like talking with everybody. I like chatting with everybody. I like to kind of see, what everybody's thinking and stuff like that. And there's so many different facets of the company now. Not nobody knows everything, So I think the discussion is pretty cool.
Cool. Well, thanks, Dre. I appreciate you. And thank you all for watching. I do appreciate it, and have a wonderful day.